The storm raged with a violence no one could have predicted, and in the chaos, Emma found herself fighting not only for her life, but for that of her child. She was ready for anything except facing the man she had blamed for years, Dr. Walter. Welcome to this channel. Before continuing with the story, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next exciting stories. Enjoy. Emma had always lived a quiet life, at least until that day. Born and raised in a small Italian town, she spent much of her childhood between the mountains and the lake of Riva del Sole, a place she had always considered a safe haven, far from the chaos of urban life. Every summer, together with his family, he took refuge there, in his grandparents' house, where he could breathe the tranquility and the fresh air. That place had marked his happiest years, but also the most painful. Years later, she found the love of her life in David, a caring and attentive man who did everything he could to see her happy. Together, they built a happy life. And now, with a baby on the way, their future seemed to promise only joy. Yet she carried a deep wound inside her. She had never forgotten that tragic New Year's Eve, when her grandmother had died suddenly in front of everyone's eyes, without anyone being able to do anything. And in the midst of all this chaos, Dr. Walter, the only doctor present, refused to help her. Emma couldn't forgive him, convinced that if he had only done something, her grandmother would still be alive. Time passed, but the resentment remained, digging a furrow ever deeper into Emma's heart. So, when David proposed spending a weekend right at Riva del Sole, she hesitated. The good memories were there, but so were the ghosts of the past. Despite everything, she decided to accept, hoping that this brief escape could bring her some peace before the arrival of their child. It was a clear morning when they set off, the car speeding along roads surrounded by golden fields and lush trees. Emma watched the landscape, trying to enjoy those moments of tranquility, but she felt a restlessness growing inside her. Every kilometer that brought them closer to Riva del Sole brought back distant memories, sweet and bitter at the same time. When they reached the old cemetery, Emma asked David to stop. She wanted to visit her grandmother's grave, leave some flowers, maybe find some peace. David followed her in silence, respecting her need for time. After the visit, they headed to the inn where they would be staying. It was a charming place, with an air of peace and serenity. The day passed between walks through the streets of the village and local dishes, a small taste of normality in the midst of months of preparations and waiting. But that calm was soon interrupted. As night fell on Riva del Sole, the sky suddenly darkened. What had started as a light rain soon turned into a furious thunderstorm. Thunder shook the earth. Emma woke with a start. The storm shook the windows, and outside their room they could hear hurried footsteps. David went out to see what was happening and found that the situation was much more serious than they thought. The nearby river was about to flood, and the only bridge connecting the city to the rest of the world was at risk of collapse. As the inn guests quickly fled, Emma began to feel ill. The pressure of the moment, combined with her advanced pregnancy, caused her to faint. David, worried about her and the baby, decided to rush her to the hospital. But the hospital was almost empty. Most of the staff and patients had been evacuated because of the storm. Only one nurse and one doctor remained for emergencies. It was in that moment, amidst the chaos of the storm and the pain of her contractions, that Emma's eyes fell on him. Her breathing stopped, and the world around her seemed to dissolve into a deafening silence. Dr. Walter was there before her, like a ghost from the past. The face of the man who had haunted her nightmares for years, the man she believed responsible for the death of her beloved grandmother, was now the only person who could save her. Emma's heart pounded as a wave of conflicting emotions washed over her: terror, anger, helplessness. She couldn't believe that fate had played such a cruel joke on her. The doctor she feared more than anything was now the only one she would have to trust with her life and that of her baby. If you like the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories. Thanks for the support. Emma's labor proved more difficult than expected. The storm raged outside the hospital walls, and inside, the emotional chaos was reflected in every contraction that shook her body. When the baby was finally born, an eerie silence fell. Every sound seemed to fade away, as if the entire world had held its breath. The baby was there, but there was no sign of life. His tiny body was still, his chest was unheaving, no cries. Emma felt terror rise inside her like a cold wave, blocking her heart. Her gaze met David's, both paralyzed by anguish. The absence of that long-awaited cry became unbearable, a silence that weighed like a boulder. Was she about to lose her son? But before she could completely collapse, Dr. Walter intervened with expert hands, delicately suctioning the amniotic fluid from the newborn's lungs. And then, like a miracle, the sound of the baby's crying filled the air, breaking the terrifying silence and bringing relief to everyone in the room. For Emma, it was like a rebirth. The doctor she had blamed for so long, the man she thought was responsible for the greatest pain of her life, was now the architect of a new life. In that moment, the resentment she had carried inside for so many years began to dissolve. Her hands, which had been clenched in fists of anger, relaxed. Looking at her son, finally in her arms, she knew it was time to let go of the pain. Shortly afterward, David whispered in her ear what the nurse had told him. Dr. Walter stayed here to help, while most of the others ran away. He chose to stay because he thought someone might need him. These words hit Emma deeply. For years, she had been looking for someone to blame for her grandmother's death. But perhaps it was time to understand that sometimes life has no culprits. Sometimes tragedies happen, and we can't help but accept them.